I don't. Testing. Okay. Just make sure we are good. Oh, did you share? Testing. Karen, is the sound working on YouTube? Okay, thank you. All right, we are good to go.
Yes.
Good evening and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, November 28th, 2023. Let me start by reading a small paragraph or two. The city has returned to hybrid public meetings pursuant to AB 361, which allows for the deviation from teleconference rules by the Ralph M. Brown Act. Residents now have the option to attend the meeting in person or participate remotely. To participate remotely, residents can live stream the meeting at www.prcity.com/YouTube or call 805-865-7276 to provide public comment via phone. The phone lines will open just prior to the start of the meeting and remain open throughout the meeting to ensure the opportunity for the public to comment on each item heard by the Commission. Written comments can be submitted via email to planning@prcity.com. Those received prior to 12 o'clock noon on the day of the meeting to be posted to the city's website as an addendum to the agenda. If submitting written comments in advance of the meeting, please note the agenda item by number or name. And the Planning Commission meetings, please note the agenda item by number or name. Planning Commission meetings will be live streamed during the meeting and available to play later on YouTube by accessing the following link, www.prcity.com/YouTube. And now for the Pledge of Allegiance, please join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Covarrubias? Here. Commissioner Kogler? Here. Commissioner Christensen? Here. Commissioner Davis?
Here.
Commissioner Connolly? Here. Commissioner Marlowe? Chairperson Neal?
Here.
The record will reflect that Marlowe is absent. He notified us he's ill today.
Hope he feels better soon. Staff introductions, please.
Marcy Reynoso and Jessica Ferguson, administrative assistants.
Warren Fraze, Community Development Director.
Darcy Delgado, Associate Planner.
This is Annie Branham, Legal Counsel on the line.
Darren Nash, City Planner.
Okay, I think that's everybody. And now is the time for general public comments regarding matters not on the agenda. Not seeing anybody in the room. Marcy, is there anybody online?
No callers.
Are there any agenda items to be proposed to be tabled or rescheduled?
There are none.
Great. And there are no public hearings this evening, so we'll move right on to discussion items. And this is a comprehensive zoning update, preliminary review of portions of the comprehensive zoning code update. Planning Commission will review and hear public comment and provide general direction to staff on refinements to draft Articles 4, 5, and 7. Staff presentation, please.
Yes, thank you, Darcy Delgado. So we do have Genevieve with MIG on the line. She's going to be doing a presentation tonight. And then, so as you read, this is a preliminary review of Articles 4, 5, and 7. The last time that the Planning Commission had a study session was back in September. And so we have 2 complete articles for your review, and then a portion of Article 4 we're actually revisiting since the last meeting. And so after Genevieve gives her presentation and throughout, we're welcome to, pause and do Q&A or wait till the end. But Katie and I have been working diligently with Genevieve on this and feel like we've made quite a bit of progress. So that's what we're here for tonight, is to get feedback from the Planning Commission on our progress thus far. And with that, I will turn it over to Genevieve.
Great. Thank you so much, Darcy, and good evening, Commission and members of the public. I'm going to share my screen very quickly. So I'm going to take that over. And thank you again for having me here tonight. I'm Genevieve Sherrill with MIG. Been working really closely with staff to evaluate and update the zoning code. I'll give just a brief overview of what were our key objectives, just to keep us all in the same headspace. We're really looking to reorganize the code, simplify it, make it brief and to the point, provide clarity to the user, and really make it as easy to use as possible. We want it to be internally consistent. It's been updated in quite a piecemeal fashion over the years, so we really want to remove any of those inconsistencies and create a new structure that tries to eliminate inconsistencies moving forward. We're adding more modern approaches, streamlining review, and adding some clarity and some structure. In the end, we'll have a lot more graphics and my favorite, tables, and we'll be implementing all the new laws that have passed. So there's kind of a natural order to zoning codes, a way they tend to kind of fall out. And since we're comprehensively reorganizing the zoning code, hopefully we're going to get to that really intuitive and easily searchable order. So we've looked at already a number of articles with the HCOC and the Planning Commission. We've looked at Article 1, which really sets the stage for the housing for the zoning code. We looked at, in conjunction with that, new allowable uses and the use table. The use table goes kind of hand in hand with standards for those specific land uses, terms and definitions. We also looked at who reviews those permits under Article 2. We looked at that last time we were together. And the first draft of the objective design standards under Article 4, those standards that pertain to multifamily and mixed use. So today, we'd like to look at a few new articles. We're going to look at Article 5, the special regulations, that covers kind of unique uses, the second draft of the objective design standards, and Article 7, which will be the nonconformities. And we already looked at those pieces. So during our last session, we gave kind of a more detailed overview of the objective design standards. And following that meeting, staff worked to address some of the comments that we heard, making sure that we had enough items to choose from so that architects could, not be pigeonholed into a particular architectural style, and also have, enough options to choose from to meet the need. And Vince Vanderlip was generous enough to go through the document in detail with staff and provide a lot of really focused and additional feedback to identify some of those key items from a developer's perspective, which was immensely useful, and wanted to just call out a thank you to him. So what are the objective standards that we're talking about? Just a refresher here. These are those standards that can be quantified and measured. So state law for residential development is really leading jurisdictions towards these types of standards that streamline approval processes and really remove any of that subjectivity, any back and forth between applicants and decision makers, and ultimately looking to really reduce discretion in the decision-making process. So the new objective design standard chapter will apply to multifamily zones and in the mixed use overlay. It won't apply to the single family zones, and it won't apply to the Uptown Town Center specific plan area, which has its own form-based code. And the intent here is really these objective design standards are a really clean and clear process. If someone chooses to comply with this clean and clear process, it's intended to be a more streamlined review. However, there's always a modification process which will kind of parallel the process that the city has today. So you can continue to do business as usual under that methodology. So subjective versus objective. The subjective standards that we've seen in codes are really more like guidelines. They often say the word should, kind of intended to guide an applicant toward a preferred outcome without outright saying what is required. You know, it can be really helpful, I think, but unfortunately through the way the laws are changing, it's not really implementable. So in come these objective standards, which should really be read without resulting in two different interpretations by two different people. So they generally include measurements or performance standards of a certain type. So to that end, the objective design standards were drafted to include a variety of options for implementation. We don't want to pigeonhole into a particular design type or structure. So we've created this structure that has various tiers with more design features required for larger and longer kind of horizontal projects than smaller projects. The first tier, tier 1, all buildings in the multifamily zoning districts and mixed use overlay would be required to comply with these tier 1 components. And these really kind of focus on the fundamentals of kind of site planning and building design. So orienting the building towards the street, the minimum ground floor height of non-residential spaces, transparency, so windows, the minimum window area. The previous draft that you saw also had a requirement for windows to be inset by 2 inches, and that was removed based on feedback to try and open up design styles and also put this as an option instead of as a requirement. But we do still have some requirements, no blank walls, and corners of buildings, especially at street corners, should be treated with a little bit of extra articulation. The second tier is where many of the options start in even fuller force. So all buildings are required to provide some wall plane variation, so something that sets the building back. And studies have shown that it's really important to the eye, be it, you know, the layman, pedestrian, or an architect. What our eye really likes to see is shadows, and that shadow results from changing the plane. So this requirement for changing a wall plane variation would apply to all buildings, but it can be met through a lot of different ways, through putting in a plaza, upper story step backs, balconies, bay windows. Any kind of massing break can accommodate this need. Key changes, though, from the last draft that you saw are to reduce that requirement from 35% to 25% on larger buildings. And then also, as we were looking at some of the really long horizontal buildings, it became clear that what really needs to happen is to break up the building with a more vertical change. So that was added in. And also to clarify that this is really only intended to apply to facades that are facing the public right-of-way, not the entire 360 of the building. Tier 3 is about more of the building articulation. So buildings can choose from a pretty large list of options to meet this standard. And larger buildings do need to use more than one of these requirements to meet this standard. So we had a number of different ways that additional articulation can be provided, window trim, lintels, windowsills, exceed transparencies, awnings. But we did hear that there was concern about not having enough, especially in this tier, about kind of, the different ways that articulation can be performed on a building. So 3 new options are also included in this menu, including that window inset of 2 inches, more types of wood detailing that kind of happen at kind of a mid-story location. So if you have kind of post and beams that are supporting a balcony, it can do a kind of a lot for the articulation of the building, or rafter tails that are supporting an overhang at like a 2nd story, or putting a larger porch on can really affect the look of the building as well. So we wanted to add those as additional options. And the intent is really not to force a particular design style, but to provide lots of different ways that a building can be articulated. And also a clarification, this is only intended to apply to facades visible from the public right-of-way. To meet the Tier 4 requirement, buildings have to articulate their roofs, either through combining different roof styles, having a sufficiently large eave or rake, dormers, vary the orientation. And we also added 2 more options to meet this requirement, either rafter tails now at the roof level, or some of the more kind of expensive roof types were also added here. We wanted to be able to give credit where designers wanted to use those particular design styles. The next section in the ODS chapter establishes standards if a building chooses to provide awnings, balconies, or certain roof types. And there weren't too many changes proposed in these sections. With regard to awnings, this draft removes the requirement to align with adjacent properties. That was noted as potentially a constraint. And also balconies, it was clarified that this is really only the transparency requirements only applicable to those that are visible from the public right-of-way. We also made some clarifications on all roofs, but not too many changes there. The objective design standards also include frontage types and standards for each frontage type. So there's 3 different frontage types from which any building can choose, and no significant changes are proposed except to clarify how measurement is performed. Previously, it relied on columns at the edge of porches, which does imply a certain design style. So now it's clarified. It could be a wall or a half wall that you're measuring from to allow for both a recessed and a projecting porch. The next section is on building materials and colors. Building materials that are allowed as either a primary or a secondary cladding material are listed, as well as certain prohibited materials. Key revisions that this draft proposes, one is to allow synthetic stucco that was previously listed as a prohibited material type, and also to add a prohibition on styrofoam trim. It had previously been listed for molding and cornices because it was under the roof part, but also to not allow that type of trim as well. And then the final section is looking at how does the project transition to any adjacent single-family zoning district. So if the project's located next to a single-family zone, the current code already considers adjacencies, but these standards add a little bit of additional nuance. Currently, there's a step-back structure required for buildings next to single-family zones. We've simplified that to really, if you're over 2 stories, you have to be set back at least 20 feet. And there's a new requirement to think about the site plan of more active uses oriented away from the single-family zone. In this draft, we also added balconies to that consideration, along with the retention of the proposed landscape buffer adjacent to the R1 zone. So we had a couple of just prompting questions, wanted to make sure that we were on the right page with these changes with you, and to see if you had any thoughts or comments about the materials section and especially those changes that are proposed. Are there particular concerns that you have about allowing synthetic stucco, or if you have any input on the different types of stucco finishes that should be allowed, or the level of detail that's proposed here? We also wanted to confirm the direction that we're going with regard to the majority of these standards really applying only where it's visible from the public right-of-way. So we wanted to confirm that is the correct direction with you. And then back to that tier 3 menu of items, we have added additional items there, and we wanted to just kind of check in, see if that addition of those 3 items to the list felt like the right amount to provide enough variety for applicants moving forward, and get your feedback on those pieces as well. In the past, I've kind of paused at each section, but I defer to the chair if you'd like me to keep going.
Let me ask the Commission if they have any questions regarding the performance or the design standards. Commissioner Kogler.
Thank you. Just one general question, and I think this might be leftover language from earlier reports, which is fine. In the key highlights, it talks about staff has worked diligently with local developers to review this. I'm curious if that included any local architects, and whether it did or not. Can you talk about what kind of feedback you got, particularly on design standards?
Sure. So thus far, we did take the ODS section through HCOC, and Vince Vanderlip is on HCOC. He was generous to give Katie and I his time, and he was the only person who really provided the comments. We haven't gotten really any comments, but we also haven't been seeking any specific architect or developer. He was just kind of offering to help. So at this point, we've gotten feedback at HCOC, but it's been kind of one-off comments. Vince was the only one who gave us very specific feedback on the draft.
So if I may, a follow-up question, maybe it's to you and Genevieve. Zoning frequently is a cut and paste operation. You look at what somebody else has done, and that's a good idea. And we'll tweak it a little bit. How much of this material is really new to the marketplace, and how much of this do you think has been tested elsewhere?
I'll take a stab at the first part of that. So we've worked in tandem with Atascadero on drafting these, and in the process of doing that, we worked with a local architect to make sure that it was feasible and also kind of made sense, readable, and some of the price points too, just to understand, a lot of the menu items we want to make in somewhat of a similar price point, so that we don't have some like super cheap parts and some that are much too expensive and would never be chosen. So he was really instrumental in helping us understand those pieces from a local perspective and also implementation wise.
Thank you.
And then just to kind of add to the discussion, one of the comments that Katie and I heard about our ODS chapter was that some of these standards might be too onerous, or, we don't have enough items listed, and that's, that might be too expensive. We should really consider this. And so we took all that in, but one of the key, I would say, themes that we were trying to remain in the mindset is that there is an alternative review process for someone who chooses to not, follow the objective design standards. And so, if these are things that are being used today, these articulations criteria, but they're not, somebody doesn't want to use them, or maybe they do feel like it's not cost efficient, they can go through this alternative review process, and it turns into a discretionary review of the project. So we tried to scale back some of the comments we were getting that, it should be 18 inches instead of 16 inches or vice versa. So that was something that did come out of our discussions with Vince.
Commissioner, Commissioner Conlon.
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily get into the weeds, but some of these changes kind of beg the question why. Like, why are we reducing the wall plane variation from 35 to 25? Or why is there no styrofoam trim allowed? I mean, it just kind of, I don't want to necessarily prolong the meeting and get into the weeds, but some of these things that we look at here, to me, begs the question, well, is there a reason behind it?
Yeah, so I know, Genevieve, I think you had mentioned that the 35 to the 25%, that was because we found out that it was actually too much, right? Once we started measuring these and so we were using plans that have gone through the pipeline and actually trying to, we did several projects that are both in the city of Paso Robles, and then Genevieve, as she mentioned, is working with the Tascadero. So we took actual projects that are either under construction or have gone through planning to see if these were making sense or if we were, shooting too far where we would have too much articulation. And so I believe that's why that 35 got scaled back. Is that correct, Genevieve?
Correct, yes.
And then as far as the foam, it's just something that we've heard it and seen over time that it doesn't stand up, that polyurethane foam, but it's not a deal breaker. I mean, certainly if it seems like something that the Planning Commission is going to be getting these projects with the multifamily projects that we see coming, that we've seen already and then continue to see in the future, if that's something that, you wouldn't mind being an option, certainly we can add it back in.
Thank you.
Anything else? I do. I have a question on the metal roof. I think if I remember right, every time a metal roof is proposed in an R1, it comes before the DRC for approval. Are we changing that requirement to allow metal roofs, or is this only for multifamily?
So it's only for multifamily zones, but you could, we did have let's see, on the table, if you had one unit in a multifamily zone, they would have to do zero. They don't have to do a metal roof, but that's a good question. I assume it would go to DRC still if it was a metal roof. I'd have to cross-reference the other sections.
If it's an objective design standard, then if they grab it, then it's approved.
Okay, yeah.
So we may want to think about, I'm not saying to get rid of the metal roof. I'm saying maybe get rid of the requirement for a metal roof in an R1 to go before DRC. So
that's good observation.
And then I'm a little hazy on what synthetic stucco is. Is it a two-coat with a finish coat of acrylic, or is it a whole new sort of facade system that not 100% sure of?
I don't know that I'm 100% sure either. I was hoping somebody might have more experience in stucco than myself.
So there's a manufacturer called Drive It that does a foam based, but we're not allowing foam. So that maybe isn't it. So I'm not sure what synthetic stucco is, but I would argue that if you just allowed the two coat with the acrylic, nobody would ever know that it wasn't the standard three coat stucco finish.
So the city of Atascadero was the first one to sort of shop these standards, and they were prohibiting synthetic stucco. So as we have developed ours, we became aware that it's standard practice to put acrylic in the stucco material. And so it seemed that was already being used, and as you said, is not discernible from natural stucco. Did I misunderstand?
No, 100%. Yeah. So you did not, I don't know why we would point out necessarily that synthetic stucco is allowed. It's just a different finish coat on a two-coat stucco system.
Yeah, this was changing from the first draft prohibited it, and now we're just allowing it because there was really no reason to prohibit it.
But maybe we define it someplace. And that's really it for me. Anything else? All right. Thank you, everybody. Genevieve?
All right. Thank you. Moving on to Article 5 and the special regulations. These are those uses that are really quite unique and often referenced in the code. This includes accessory dwelling units, adult businesses, cannabis, density bonus, historic preservation, murals, short-term rentals, the 2-unit or SB9 projects, and wireless communication facilities. The 5 items with no substantive changes next to them really are just some reorganization, renumbering, and some changes to match the conventions that we're using throughout the new zoning code, but really don't have too many changes to them. There are a few changes that we wanted to point out to you to the other remaining chapters. The first is on ADUs. The ADU ordinance was updated last year about this time to implement some new laws. So this is really just a focused update and includes a more user-friendly format and some clarification about the 2 primary types of ADUs. There are those that are allowed by right by the state. Those are called the statewide exemption ADUs, and then local ADUs, which are subject to the city standards. And local ADUs can allow for a more generous size. They can be a little bit bigger, but you have to meet the regular setbacks for that zone. You don't get punted into the 4-foot setbacks that the statewide exemption ADUs do. So really just kind of making clear what the distinction is between those two different types of ADUs from a processing standpoint, so that it's a little bit easier for the user to understand. The one key kind of more substantive change here is to kind of close an existing loophole. We've added that there's a maximum size for a garage if you're going to attach it to an ADU, really just so that people can't use the ADU law to kind of circumvent the city's accessory structure limitations. So if you choose to attach a garage to an ADU, it has to be a normal size garage, limited to 800 square feet in this instance. Another minor change, currently the adopted ordinance sets a 20-foot setback in the front yard for ADUs. And we propose to change that to really just say whatever the front setback is, it's the front setback for the whole property, including whatever the primary structure setback is. It's the same for ADUs. So to be just a little bit more user-friendly and clear there. Density bonus ordinance. This is really intended to parallel state law. This is the state's density bonus ordinance, and state law has been modified numerous times. Almost every year, this section of the government code is amended. So the existing code references some specific percentages of the density bonus, like how that's calculated and some other features. The rewritten version is intended to kind of have a little bit more lasting quality, as we're kind of referencing that state law instead of repeating it, because it's often changing. Oops, skipped this one. The historic preservation section was kind of comprehensively reorganized, but most of the substance really does stay the same. And really the intent is to parallel how the city is generally processing items pertaining to historic preservation today. And so really just to codify that process. One of the key changes proposed is pertaining to the review authority. So in this proposed draft, this would authorize the Planning Commission rather than the City Council to consider certificates of appropriateness for any alteration to a locally designated historic resource. So currently those certificates of appropriateness are going to City Council. City Council will retain review authority for any project that would affect a state or nationally designated landmark and any demolitions. The wireless communications facilities section was modified really to reorganize, add some clarity, and match federal law requirements, just to be really clear about a ministerial approval process for minor modifications to existing facilities. And I could pause there for any questions.
Does the commission have any questions? Commissioner Kohler?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Question, Genevieve, on the short-term rental, it was listed as no substantive changes. Was the change limited to just numbering? Are there any changes to that section?
There were no changes except for numbering and the conventions of our code. So where we're matching, we're saying director instead of community development director or that type of change. So nothing substantive to that section. Gotcha.
And then the other question I had, both of these were related to those that we weren't going to discuss much. The cannabis piece, I assume there's a lot of other ordinances, state, health codes and so forth that are cross-referenced there. I noticed it didn't address where cannabis can be used. I assume that's covered elsewhere in some code or some statute that's picked up. Like on public property, for example, or in parks or something of that nature.
That's a good question. I honestly didn't look at this too much because I knew we weren't going to change too much of it. But we also have certain parts of the Muni Code that we could reference as well. Darcy, I don't know if you had any input on that.
Yeah, just to add that, so that section was written by the city attorney's office, BBK. So we can take another look at it and see if we're missing something, and propose a change if needed.
Okay. I didn't know state law covered that, but I've seen other ordinances that address where it can be used.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Commissioner Christensen?
I just, I wonder, can you clarify again on the max garage size? I think you stated it was 800 square feet. Is that more of a local ADU? Is that what you're saying you're adding as a change to that portion of the code?
So for what it's worth, it's actually 500 square feet is what's proposed.
Oh, sorry.
No, so right now, we've had a few applications come in where we get a really large, like 1,000 square foot garage with an ADU attached, and we have to say that's an ADU. So this would say that if you want a 1,000 square foot garage or 501 square foot garage, you're coming to the planning commission for a use permit. You can certainly have a garage attached to your ADU, but once they start to get big, you would come to the planning commission for a use permit.
Okay, I know this is getting a little in the weeds, but what if the garage has, let's say, a utility room off of that or what have you? Would that be considered part of the garage space? Is there a clarification of that, or is there some flexibility in when that's presented?
I believe it would, like if you had exterior storage closets, it would probably get counted towards that 500 square feet. Your standard garage is 20 by 20, so 400 square feet. So we've given an additional 100 square feet, but we could certainly play with that number too if you want to see it at 600 or,
I'm not sure that I'm worried about the number per se. I mean, I get what you guys were aiming for. I think what I'm just saying is some of these west side lots, if you're putting in a garage, like I live in an older home, I could see myself adding a utility room off of the back of an additional garage that I would not consider that garage space, especially if it's walled off. So does that consider, and maybe I put an ADU above that, I don't know. But what I'm saying is there's some flexibility in there for some of those types of changes. And to that point as well, the setbacks existing, I get what you were going for there. That does seem to kind of try and simplify it, but I'm a little worried that in some of our neighborhoods here that might oversimplify it to a certain extent. So as long as you feel that there's some leeway there when a project's submitted, I know we've got some of these places where you've got corner lots a lot on the west side, and their setbacks vary depending on maybe when that lot was split off or a portion of it was split or when the house was built, garage added, that kind of stuff. So I could see that being some issues that we could be facing.
Yeah, so state law tells us that we have to approve, and there's some nuance with multifamily and so forth, but the basic is we have to allow 800 square foot ADUs to be as close as 4 feet to side and rear property lines. So what the proposed ordinance would do, and there's already some of this nuance in our existing ordinance, but it's pretty hard to use. The idea is as long as you meet our local standards for a primary residence, you can go 1,200 square feet. You can go to the maximum height that's allowed in the zoning district. So as long as you comply with all of our local rules, you're given a bit more grace. So that's the intent. And so when you're talking about the unusual lots, I mean, they're going to be somewhat governing because if it's small, the setbacks are going to reduce the size of the unit, but I'm not sure that addresses your concern.
No, I guess what I'm saying is that I could see that this could be, even for a new ADU where there's not an existing building and the 4 foot setback doesn't apply, let's say, and you're dealing with just a front setback, maybe there's room on the side. I could see that there may be some issues in that regard. If you're going to consider the front off the main street, or how would you deal with the side street,
To kind of piggyback on the conversation, I think one thing we might think about is, so if you have traditionally we have houses that are 15 to 20 feet setback. So what if you have a house that's 35 feet setback, and now we're saying that the ADU has to be, behind that setback. But anyway, so if maybe we need to look at, is it you can't be any closer than the primary, or what if the primary is, further back? Can you be closer and kind of call, we do have houses that are 20 feet off the street, from the front property line. So maybe we can just take another look at that.
I don't think it's going to be a major issue. I'm just saying that I think that we've got to allow some kind of, obviously it's across the counter type situation, but in this situation, would that be considered something that has to go before the planning commission or DRC if we have to address an issue like that?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. So you're saying like if someone wants to put the ADU in front of the house?
So I think that there's like with the city pastoral whistleblower, we have certain circumstances which it's going to be where if we're saying you can't put the ADU any closer.
If it's not fitting in the box is my point.
Right.
And there's a lot of places I could walk around town and find that it won't fit in the box, but I could see them applying for it.
So again, state law says we have to allow up to an 800 square foot ADU, and there's actually a hierarchy in the ordinance that says if you want to build an 800 square foot unit, and that means that we have to give you smaller setbacks than 4 feet, or a smaller front setback, or allow more lot coverage, there's a hierarchy that says these are the things that we'll first let the building get taller, and then we'll let it get closer to the property line. So there definitely is some flexibility. Because of state law, we have to allow virtually any property in town to have an 800 square foot.
So this was more geared towards the local ADU requirements. Is that what you're trying to, I mean?
The nuance in the code is geared towards the local ADUs. We have state law that we have to comply with.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification. Appreciate it.
And Commissioners, this is Annie Branham from BBK. I just wanted to pop on about the cannabis question. I did pull up the code and confirm section 9.41.040, which is not in the zoning code, but that does talk about certain, prohibitions on locations where cannabis can be ingested or smoked. So just wanted to tidy that up.
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. On page 12, impact fees, it says the impact fee required for an ADU that is 750 square feet or larger in size shall be charged proportionately in relationship to the size of the primary dwelling unit. What is the proportion?
So that language is coming from state law as well. So currently, Devin Coonley, who's the development, I'm going to mess up her title, development services manager. We looked at the 5 years of data for the average size of a primary residence in Paso Robles, which ended up being right about 2,000 square feet. So we figured out what the development impact fee was for a 2,000 square foot unit, divided it by 2,000, and then for every foot of an ADU, you get charged proportionally. So I can't remember the exact number. It's $6-7 per square foot.
Is that over 750 or?
That's right. As soon as you go, it's over 749. So once you hit 750, you pay whatever it is, $6-7 per square foot. But that does include all those, the initial 750 as well.
So I guess it doesn't necessarily say that in B on page.
I believe
12?
what B says mirrors state law. And we have our practice of how we've applied
Very
those,
good.
and they've been adopted in the fee schedule.
As many state laws are, it's unclear. And then I was looking at the second, if you go to each heading or each chapter, the very next item is purpose and applicability, easy for me to say. And then adult uses, it has it again, but if you go to adult uses, the first one is actually purpose and findings. So do we want to try to keep those all sort of the same heading, or are there other things driving those headings? Because if I think it's density bonus, there's purpose and then applicability in two separate sections. Do we combine those? So the
sections that we're really touching, we are following a consistent organizational style. The sections that were written largely by the city attorney's office, we're not touching. Adult businesses, cannabis, things that it's kind of beyond the scope of this review and beyond, I think, we're not proposing any changes to the adult-oriented businesses because that complies with a very specific state law that we have to, address in our community.
So jumping into the adult-oriented businesses on page 18, S, youth-oriented facilities, seems like an odd placement for that particular definition. And so maybe that's not supposed to be there. Page 18 or 40 of 107 for the agenda item, I'm sorry.
I believe that is because there's a separation requirement between youth-oriented facilities and an adult-oriented, and so it's defined because that's not a term that has meaning elsewhere in the code, a specific meaning.
But I don't know as if it references a separation to specific youth-oriented facilities anywhere near that. So it just seems like a pretty bizarre landing of that definition. So. It may very well be an important definition, but maybe not there.
This
And
is
then-
Annie again. I was able to search the code. I have it all pulled up so I can kind of do that a little more quickly. That a reference to youth-oriented businesses does appear in 21.59.040, which is part of the adult business chapter. So I think that's probably why the definition appears there.
I think, Annie, his question is why is it defined there in the adult-oriented business code section?
Yes, and I think, I suppose my response is there is a section of the adult business ordinance that, just like you said, has a separation requirement. And so there is a direct reference to being separated from a youth-oriented business. And so I think we define it to be consistent because we reference the term within the adult business ordinance. And so it may be different in different contexts. And so I think it's important to reference it where
Yeah,
it is.
I think I'm understanding it now. It's just the fact that the format and the justification of these subsections seems off because the major subsection is indented and the minor is not. So I think if that format were fixed, which I'm sure this is just a draft, it would all make sense. And because, thank you, Annie, I figured out that actually is a definition and it is important to be right there. So.
I understand what you're saying. That makes sense.
And I'm seeing what you're seeing now, so we can definitely communicate that and make sure Genevieve also can help us with the formatting there.
I have a question
Yes.
on adult business license. On page 40 of 107, and again, I realize that this is an existing that you've taken, but I do have a question. It says that the adult business license must be obtained from the Planning Commission. I really haven't thought of the Planning Commission as providing the business license. That wording sounded unusual to me. And it also said failure of the Planning Commission to approve or deny the license application within the 30 days shall result in the licensing being granted. That surprises me. Is that really how it's supposed to work? Is that we're going to be granting the licenses, or are we giving approval that kind of business can go in a certain designated zone is what I thought our role was. I'm confused about the role of the Planning Commission here in granting business licenses.
This is not a section of the code that any of our current staff is super familiar with because I think, thank goodness, luckily we haven't received, a lot of these applications. These are businesses that are, can have a, people aren't necessarily comfortable with them. So we have not brought any applications to the Planning Commission in a long time because we have not gotten applications for them. But this is the process that was laid out by legal staff.
Okay, and I do remember this was quite an issue in Atascadero some time ago. And so I understand the need to be very specific and detailed, but the wording of that caught me by surprise that this body would be granting that business license. So it's something that maybe you could explore a little bit.
It is a pretty antiquated code section, so it'd probably be good for BBK just to give it a quick review and see if there's any updates that need to be made.
Thank you.
Yeah, we would be happy to do that.
Are there any other questions from Commission? Hearing none. Genevieve.
Great, thank you. One last, well, I guess we've got two more things we'd like to cover with you today. The first, the second from the last is Article 7, nonconformities. So this nonconformity chapter article covers 5 major sections. Lots that are not conforming to the current code, structures that are not conforming to current code, and uses that are not conforming to current code. And we've also added some other additional non-conforming provisions. In general, for the non-conforming provisions, we clarified some things. We removed some amortization requirements, which are really difficult to enforce, and we reorganized to really clarify the different procedures for non-conforming uses, structures, and lots. So it was a lot of reorganization. We have a few substantive changes or minorly substantive changes that we wanted to go over with you. With regard to non-conforming lots, nothing huge here, except the one change that we did propose was to really allow any lot line adjustment for a non-conforming lot if the adjustment isn't going to increase the nonconformity. So really just kind of a common sense thing. If you're not becoming more nonconforming, you can move forward. With regard to nonconforming structures, again, no huge changes here, but a few nuances that we could point out. Currently, the way the code is written, if a nonconforming structure is partially destroyed by a force majeure, act of God, flood, fire, more than 50% of the fair market value of the building, it has to be rebuilt to code. So most codes instead use the square footage of the building instead of fair market. It's easier to implement. You don't need an appraisal. It can be done by the city staff. So that change is proposed to instead look at how much of the structure itself was destroyed rather than the fair market value. And then in addition, a proposed revision would be to be a little bit more permissive for those acts of God up to 75% of the structure, but only 50% if it's purposely damaged. So if 75% of the structure is damaged by a fire, then it has to be rebuilt to code. But if it's less than that, you could rebuild it to what it was previously built at. With regard to non-conforming uses, the draft proposes to allow for a 12-month grace period before a use is considered abandoned rather than 6 months. With regard to non-conforming uses that are happening in a structure that's destroyed, the proposed draft is basically to match the calculation for structures based on square footage rather than fair market value, similar to the non-conforming structures, but limited to the 50% of the structure the way the current code is. We also added a couple other non-conforming provisions that weren't currently in the code, but are pretty common to clarify what to do with non-conforming parking, for instance. Uses with legal non-conforming parking can continue, but just to be clear that you can't, if you do increase in intensity, you have to provide that additional parking. Also, with regard to single-family residential that has non-conforming parking, only like a one-car garage, to allow for an addition up to 500 square feet or 20% of the existing structure before an additional, that second parking space would be required. And then for those non-conforming single-family residential that don't have any garage or carport, like no parking, but not if the situation involves an ADU or an SB9 project where those are exempt. But to say that at least one parking garage space would be required for an addition to a non-conforming single-family unit that has no parking spaces. With regard to non-conforming fences, this would be a new section as well. Just to clarify, single-family non-conforming fences can be maintained. Multi-family fences, to clarify, if you're going to increase the density on the property, your fence should be made to conform. Similarly, with non-residential fences, should be made to conform with any increase in intensity or addition of 1,000 square feet or more. And with regard to non-conforming landscaping, if a project doesn't currently conform with landscaping requirements in non-residential zones, if they're proposing to add at least 25% of the square footage of the existing building, they would be made to conform as well. Any questions on non-conformities before we dig into our last questions?
Commissioner Davis.
I'm really not sure if this comes in this area. We have an addendum here from Steve Sheets, and that it's regarding RVs being parked in front area of homes. Darcy, you and I have kind of talked about this in the past. I'm not sure if this applies in this section or what Mr. Sheets is addressing. Does that pertain to tonight's discussion?
So Genevieve, yeah, we did get an addendum comment letter that was provided earlier this evening. So I believe that the RV parking is going to be coming in a future batch, but remind me if that is correct.
Yes, we'll be looking at what is allowed in the front setback of R1 zones under Article 3.
Okay, so that will be in another section. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Conlon?
Kind of related to that, on page 4 of 107, we have highlighted areas that are going to be reviewed tonight, but we also have areas where the portions have been reviewed by the Planning Commission. So I don't know if this is the right time to bring it up, but I presume that the portions that have not been reviewed will be revisited at some future time with the Planning Commission.
Right, so the ones that are not yet reviewed, that are not highlighted?
Like Article 3 says portions reviewed. Article 6, portions reviewed, and Article 9. It brings to my mind that some of it has been reviewed, but some of it has not been reviewed, which would beg the question, is that coming back to us?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, there will be more of Articles 3, 6, and 9 that will be coming back to the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Covarrubias?
So as I'm reading on page 101, the destruction of structure containing a legal non-conforming use, in that paragraph, it talks about a residential unit located in a commercial or industrial district. My question is, it started to think about it. Do we still issue burn down letters? We do?
Yes, we do.
Is that written anywhere that that's an option?
I believe it's in the current code without, being that this doesn't have our markup of what's existing versus what's proposed. I believe that's in our current code right now, correct? Burn down letters?
I don't think it's in the code. We get requests from realtors and lenders and so forth for burn down letters, and we look at the existing conditions, we look at the code and analyze what would happen if the property were to burn down. What permit requirements would there be?
Okay, so there is a section somewhere that addresses.
I don't think so. We just respond to requests for those letters. It's a policy that we are willing to write those
That you're
letters.
willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Kogler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Genevieve, if you go back to the first couple of slides, one was on non-conforming uses, and I think the next one was on non-conforming structures or vice versa. This is a bit of a philosophical question. I've been involved in zoning going back a long time, not quite as far as Euclid versus Amber, but not too far away from that. And what I see here is this is becoming more flexible. Historically, many city attorneys I worked with over the years would beat on planning commissions and say, you do understand that in non-conforming uses, the intent is to make them eventually become conforming. And that planning is a long-term concept. It's measured in decades. It's not measured in days or weeks. And with that as a background, some of what I see here is moving that ball a little bit further towards allowing them to stay for substantial periods of time, which I'm not saying is good or bad. But for example, the non-conforming structures piece where it talks about the damage force majeure situation, 75% seems to be a lot. You know, it was 50% fair market value before. Was there a look at 50% of the structure as being? Because again, if the underlying intent is ultimately to encourage, is a good word, these kinds of situations to become conforming, is that the way to do it? The lot one, if you put that one up, that was on there too, I had a question on that. The aspect where it talks about, you know, maybe it was, go to your 2 slides away from this one, it might have been that one. If you would, 2 more, right there, maybe it was useless. At any rate, going to the same situation, if a lot is non-conforming, I think there was a provisional language in here that said it could actually be improved as long as essentially the non-conformity is not increased. And I'm curious about lot size. If a lot is undersized per the code, but it relatively is conforming to setbacks and so forth, can you divide it to make it less conforming to code as long as you're not increasing some of the non-conforming setbacks, structures, those kinds of things? Is that a clear question?
You wouldn't be able to further reduce a non-conforming lot if it was too small, with one exception with SB9. SB9, we have to allow them to be split, but no, if you already don't meet the minimum lot size, you wouldn't be able to further split it.
Okay, because the clause I read to that effect didn't seem quite clear, but I appreciate that. That's,
Yeah.
okay.
The intent is if you have an existing non-conforming lot, as long as you can meet the setbacks, you can develop on it. We're not going to call that a non-buildable lot.
Okay. And the comment was made that communities have moved away from the 50% value, which I think is a good thing. Is 75% replacing 50% when you look at square footage? Does that become the norm for most communities?
I don't know if it's the norm. What I have observed, I mean, I've been working as a planner not quite as long as you could, Sam. I have yet to see a planning commission not kind of allow the reestablishment of a non-conforming use. So I think this is to commemorate that we aren't really trying to, if somebody suffers a tragedy, if they want to rebuild where they were before, it's likely that we'll do that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Christensen?
Thank you. Just a couple little clarifications for me, and it may be just because I'm misunderstanding it, but the portion under chapter 21.78 on page 6 of 107, when you talked about the parking space, just so I understand this, I was a little confused. Is this enclosed or covered parking, for example, when it refers to any additions of 500 square feet or 20% of existing structure? Does that also defer to tandem parking? Are we taking that into account in both of those portions of that section?
So parking requirements are different in different zoning districts. In the R1 zoning district, that's the only district in town that we have where the parking has to be covered. And so the covered parking requirements would just be in the R1 zone. But any of the other nonconformities, it would depend on the zoning district. So if tandem parking is allowed in that zone, then it could certainly count towards, what your requirement.
And you're just referring just to the R1 zoning is what you're saying?
Anything that refers to covered parking would be in R1 zone. We don't require it anywhere else.
That's what I'm saying. To me, it's a little confusing because if it was clarifying that it's R1 zoning, that would make more sense to me. Whereas I could see where we're running into, for example, if we're talking about expanding to have more T3N and more uptown plan, typically it might look residential. It probably was. I'm just saying clarification on that might kind of help because I could see, for example, some of the projects that have come before us in the past, they're very residential, but they're not in that type of zoning. That just was something for me.
Great.
Might help clarity wise, make it smoother. And I had a question so I could understand, again, it could be just me not understanding this. The fencing, the non-residential fences shall be made to conform to increased intensity of use or addition of 1,000 square feet. What are we referring to in the intensity of use? Is that something that I maybe have missed? I would take any suggestion on what that might mean.
In a residential zone, classically, increasing intensity is increasing density. So if you want additional units, there's other ways to, like in a commercial zone, it would typically be maybe a more intensive use, which could, you've gone from, say, a restaurant to a drive-through restaurant where there's lots of trips. So that could be an intensification. But in a residential zone, intensification tends to mean more density, more units.
Okay, so there's not really a standard for that. We don't have any kind of measurement for that. It's kind of objective is what we're saying.
It's essentially someone would come in for some sort of an entitlement or a permit or something that is increasing the size of structures on their lot. It's, increasing the size of the residence, putting a garage on the lot. When are we going to start looking at all that? Like right now,
sure.
We don't look to see whether or not you need curb gutter and sidewalk improvements until you get beyond a fiscal threshold. And once your project has a value of, I think it's $65,000, now you have to bring your curb gutter and sidewalk into conformance. So this would be similar, where we're going to kind of, like if you have something weird going on with your parking or the other one was fencing, we're not going to prevent you from further developing your property and, without fixing those non-conforming issues.
Okay, great. I appreciate that explanation.
Can I add, I feel like we have gotten projects where people are asking for, or they're asking for intensifying the use, and we are using the DRC and or Planning Commission to get these things. And so I think that now we're codifying it, because I do think that we've been working with applicants and they're working very well with staff and the commission to get to a point where everyone feels good about the level of improvement. I feel like we didn't have them before, and so now we can point to them if anyone is saying, well, why do I have to, install a wrought iron fence when it was a wood fence before? We can kind of say, well, it was non-conforming in that zone because you're, commercial use. I think that's why we.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I just was wondering if there was some other type of measurement that was used in the past and we're, changing language. So, I don't mind the language per se. I mean, I think it is nice to have that review and flexibility to review it in that sense. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood it as you guys explained it. Okay, so that's very helpful. Let's see. I thought I had one more question. Nope, you got that one answered. Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Great, thank you. Genevieve, are we going to wireless communication facilities? Which would be incredibly exciting.
I don't have a lot to say about that.
Nice.
So actually, I was going to bring us back to a couple of items that were discussed last meeting that we wanted to just revisit with you. We talked a little bit about oak tree removal. And Darcy or Katie, I'm not sure if you wanted to dig into this piece in particular, because this has really been thought through by staff more.
Sure. So I think most of the Planning Commission is aware that today, if you want to remove an oak tree over 6 inches in diameter, it does require City Council review. And so you guys often review projects that you would typically be able to approve, but because there's an oak tree removal, it automatically means you're just making a recommendation to the City Council. So staff's recommendation is that we allow the Planning Commission to approve a certain number of oak tree removals. You would still be subject to all the findings and all the same considerations that the City Council has to consider when they decide whether or not to allow an oak tree to be removed, but it would help to streamline projects and still allow you, it's not that you wouldn't be able to deny an oak tree removal, but it would be something that you could consider. So the proposed thresholds would be that no matter what, if there are 5 or more trees proposed to be removed, or if the cumulative diameters equal more than 4 feet in diameter, so you might have 1 really huge tree, or you might have 3, or I make the math easy, you might have 4 12-inch trees, that would then automatically kick you up to City Council, which is kind of status quo today. This would allow the Planning Commission to look at projects where there's just 1 to 4 trees being removed. So, there's some oak tree removals, but this is coming along with, staff's recommendation for approval because there's mitigating reasons why it makes sense to take out an oak tree, that kind of thing. It would allow the Development Review Committee, staff is proposing to allow the Development Review Committee to review a very specific situation. We get situations where someone in a single family zone that already has a home on it and they're not proposing new development, if they want to remove a tree, currently that still kicks them up to City Council. And it kind of kicks it up to a level of heightened scrutiny that we maybe staff is, not sure that it really needs to go to that high of a level of review. So staff is recommending that maybe that one little situation be something that the DRC could consider. If they were wanting to remove 2 trees, it would go to Planning Commission. But anyway, so those would be the thresholds. And then, yeah, please.
But before you move on to the next, so I think for something to consider with the DRC, 1 tree being removed, we would get an arborist report, and I think staff would be giving a recommendation to DRC. So we will be reviewing that arborist report, reviewing the findings, and if we don't feel that it is warranted, we could get a second opinion before going to DRC, or we could make a recommendation to DRC, at which time, you would have an opportunity to, approve or deny it. So I want to just throw that in there as part of that review process. And then Katie, I think you had some more.
Yeah, just some other items that we've got there on the right for discussion. So currently, as I said, oak trees that are protected in the city are 6 inches or greater in diameter. Staff is proposing that we reduce the size of a protected tree down to 2-inch diameter. One of the things that, we all marvel at our heritage oak trees because they are glorious, but if we don't protect the small trees, we're not going to have the next generation of glorious heritage trees. And so a tree that has gotten to a 2-inch diameter has sort of beat the deer, it's gotten tall enough that the deer are no longer going to take it out. And so staff is recommending that we do reduce that threshold and protect more of those small trees. So they would still be within the, if there are 5 or more 2-inch trees, it's, would go to council. So but of course, those would be smaller diameter trees. But so that's one recommendation staff is proposing, that obviously everything on this slide is up for discussion, but these are just some additional discussion points. And then when a project goes to, I've kind of skipped to the third one, when the project goes to the DRC, we just wanted to discuss which fee we should be charging. Currently, there is a director level approval, and so staff would recommend that we use that smaller fee for those DRC level reviews. And then finally, in the middle there, the middle acorn, we currently have a practice of, if you have in a single family zone, got an existing house and you've got an oak tree in your backyard that goes bad and you've got to take it out because it's going to take out your house. We currently do not require full mitigation because there typically is not room for 10 or 12 oak trees on a single family lot. So we require those folks to plant 1 oak tree. So our recommendation is that we codify that. And so that, it's clear that what we want is 1 for 1. We just want to see an oak tree continue to exist on that lot. So those are some additional thoughts that staff is having on oak trees. So definitely looking for your feedback, because it would mean that you guys would now see oak tree removals. And if you don't want to see that, then you should probably tell us not to make these changes. Great.
Thanks, Katie. Commissioner Davis.
Yeah, I recently went through this process, and it did go to the city council, and I think it's a good idea. The streamlining, I'm glad you said that it would still need an arborist report, because as a planning commissioner, I would want to make a decision about removal of tree without seeing that, or without having staff review it, or seeing something, maybe accessing the staff report. I don't know how my peers feel about it. I was surprised in the beginning it had to go all the way to city council, but it did. I don't know if it's still going to be a 600 fee, and then I didn't pay for planting. I just paid into the fund. But, it was a $1,200 expense for 1 tree. Something that had to take down. And I do think that's something that may not need to go to city council, but at the planning commission wants the documentation. So that would mean making a staff report. I don't know if it needs to go to the planning commission, but that's.
Commissioner Kogler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably an odd comment coming from a landscape architect, but the 2 inches. So if I have 5 trees on a lot that are 2 inches, I've got 10 inches of cumulative diameter. I go to the city council, even though the standard is either 5 trees or 49 inches or more. Seems to be quite a separation there. Reduction seems to make sense. 2 inches seems pretty small. I'm just curious what others might react in that regard.
Commissioner Christensen.
Thank you. I like the idea of the streamlining. I do. I think it's smart. I think we should have done this a long time ago. I'm not in favor of the 2 inches. I think that's a little too small, especially if we're already trying to encourage a 1 for 1. I just think that it's just that I can think of a lot of reasons. But anyway, I wouldn't be in favor of that. I love the idea of the reduced fees. I think anything to help in that situation, because it's already costly enough to have to take out if it's a large tree. I can tell you from having the one behind my office trimmed on a regular basis, it's not cheap. So
I can tell you exactly.
Yeah, well, I can too. I have to have it done so often because it's so massive. Yeah, well, mine's like 2 properties. All right, so that's my thoughts on that.
Commissioner Conley.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that if the Planning Commission is here to help take the burden off the City Council, I think this is a good proposal. I'm kind of neutral on the 2 versus 6, but I like, for the most part, I like this proposal because I think it would streamline the process and make it more reasonable.
So I do have a question on the DRC. There is no size limit. So I think we'd probably want to add one because I know if a big, beautiful, majestic oak came in with a 6-foot diameter, I wouldn't be excited about approving that removal at the DRC level. So I think if we could get a size limit for DRC as well.
Do you have any, I mean, I know it's a hard number to figure out. Does anybody have any thoughts on a size of tree? Maybe we should bring pictures.
I understand where you're coming from on that, Chairperson Neal. What I'm wondering is, would the DRC have the ability to defer that up to Planning Commission at the time? Or do you feel that we'd need a?
I mean, I suspect we could, but then it would be, it would just be hit or miss depending on who was on the DRC. I really would like, I think, in fact, I know, a size limit for DRC that would just automatically kick it up to Planning Commission so they didn't have to do that extra step. And so it's just my opinion. And then I think I should query the commission on what if 2 inches is not the number, 6 inches might be too big. What is the number? Commissioner Kogler.
Thank you. I was going to come back and just make sure there's an understanding that I fully support this streamlining. That's not a question here. And I personally would be willing to let the 2 inches ride for the moment and see what happens when we go through the further aspects of the process. It just raises a bit of a question in my mind as if that's too small. Maybe 6 is a little too big. Maybe 4 is a sweet spot. I don't know, but I would let it ride through the further review process, public hearings, and see what comes up.
Yeah, I think staff's interested in a little bit of input. The reason this came up is I've been out on 2 projects recently where there was trees that like 4 inches, perfectly healthy trees in good shape. And the engineers on the site, because they were under 6 inches, their plan was just to mow them down like they were weeds. And so that's the thinking in the industry out there, is if it's under 6, it's just a weed. And honestly, we see these big trees that are beautiful fall over all the time, and they're going away. So the next generation of trees are going to be the smaller trees. So I've kind of come to the opinion that it's really the smaller trees we should be protecting, and the bigger trees often aren't worth the effort because they usually are the ones that fail a year or 2 later. So I think that's what we're looking for is, we need to do something more to protect the smaller trees. Maybe 2's, not the right number, but 6 seems like it's not protecting enough of the smaller regrowth.
Okay, was that enough comments?
So I have a follow-up on a comment that you made, Chairperson Neal, about DRC. We could maybe take a look at what has gone through to City Council, these one-off situations that it's, a dead tree or a somewhat dying tree, and see what the number is and maybe come up with something to present to.
I mean, and I guess if it's a healthy tree, I would want a size limit. If the, here I am, if the arborist report says it's clearly dead or will die, then I'm not so sure a size limit is necessary. But I just don't want 3 of us to be making the decision for what could be a pretty important tree.
I think we can take another stab at it and take a look. I do have one other question that's not up here. So right now, when the trees go to City Council and it's not associated with the development plan, they're on consent. So does the Planning Commission feel that that would be the appropriate to continue with that, that 1 to 4 trees when there's no development proposed? It's not a development plan, it's just an oak tree removal, that it continues to stay on consent?
I think so, yeah. I think, Commission, I think I'm getting head nods.
As opposed to getting a full staff report with, we tend even with City Council to have 1 or 2 slides prepared in case they have questions, but Darcy's, the distinction would be a full presentation with multiple slides, multiple pictures, as opposed to you get a report, you can read that and, before the hearing, and then, if you have questions, we can answer those. But the idea would be that, it would be a pretty routine process. But if you prefer to see a whole presentation, that's what the feedback we're looking for.
I think we're comfortable with consent. I'm speaking for the commission.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the consent. I do think, at least with the city council, what I recall is the arborist had to be present in case there was a question. I don't know if that would be the case also. Planning Commission.
We always recommend to the applicants, just in case the approving body has questions.
In case it gets pulled, yeah.
I think that wraps this portion up. Any other?
I think we do have one more miscellaneous here.
Yeah, so I'll take this one, Genevieve. All right, so the last time we met, parking space modifications and the ability for the Planning Commission to approve reductions was something that we talked about, and we weren't really sure, if we were in agreement with, is 20% the right reduction? So we wanted to bring this one back for discussion. So right now, the existing code allows a mixed-use parking reduction up to 33%. So we would carry that forward, but we don't have any other reductions proposed for other uses. And so, the last time we talked about 20% and with the parking study, a justification study, and then the Planning Commission questioned, is 20% too low? Do we, want to have it be unlimited? So in addition to the mixed-use parking reduction of 33%, what we're kind of moving forward with and want to get your feedback on is parking may be reduced through approval of a development plan modification. So that's something that would come before the Planning Commission. If a parking demand study substantiated the basis for granting the parking reduction. So we have some questions. So this, the question is applied to any use or just non-residential, because we want to keep in mind that if it's a residential project, we do have, density bonus concessions where they can already ask for parking reductions, and then we get affordable housing and, deed restricted units in return. So do we want to allow residential to get a parking reduction or carve out that that's only through density bonus? Also, what is that magic number? Can the Planning Commission reduce required parking by, is it 20%, 30, 40, 50, or do you want to leave it open-ended? And so then on the right, where you have, you have basically 4 scenarios to kind of see what it would look like if you had a 10,000 square foot retail building that has a parking requirement of 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet, and they need 30 spaces, what those reductions would look like. And so same thing for the 60,000 square foot mini storage, 100 room hotel, and then not highlighted is the residential scenario, and that's a 100 unit, 2-bedroom apartment complex. We wanted to keep it really simple with the math, so that's why it's the entirely 2-bedroom. So I think staff would really like to keep the parking reductions for uses, but not for residential, just because we can use density bonus concessions and get affordable units there. But certainly the Planning Commission may think that it's perfectly suitable if there's a justification study that the project would remain market rate. Anyway, so those are the numbers. I was hoping that would spur some discussion about, what is that magic number, or do we not want to define it?
Commissioner Christensen.
Thank you. I do have a question for clarification. Would these pertain to any developmental area in town, for example, for a hotel downtown? Because that would be a very big concern for me in that regard. Now, if this is a hotel out off of Union Road, I don't think I'd have the same concern. But if it's not defined, I think we really need to be aware of what we're saying we want to do for a reduction.
Right.
I don't have a problem, like for example, 20, 30% on a retail building, it's usually a come and go traffic through certain business hours. I don't know if that's clarified as well too. I mean, if it's and then the mini storage, definitely, I mean, it's mini storage. How long are you really going to spend there for parking? I'm just saying, but, so that's a concern for me. I don't know how anybody else feels about that.
Commissioner Conley?
Well, thank you. With regard to reductions, we started the meeting with trying to have more objective criteria that's measurable, and I think that if we leave it vague, it could be one thing one year and one thing else another year, and it's not objective anymore. It would just depend on the Planning Commission members and how they felt at the time. So I think maybe there needs to be some logic behind it, but I think to be objective and measurable, we need something to be consistent, and to go more liberal in allowing more of a reduction. It seems like there should be something, some type of criteria that would allow you to do that rather than just somebody's feeling. That's
Commissioner Kogler?
Thank you. I would like to tell you that when this went up on the screen, I had an aha moment. And there they were. It was the right percentage. That didn't happen. Some of these uses, and I think Commissioner Christensen was kind of pointing, some of my mini storage, I think, is not a big a concern. Retail can mean a lot of things. Unlimited at the whims of a planning commission. This planning commission, I think, holds the line pretty tight on parking for the most part. I don't know what future ones will do. So truthfully, this is a morass that I don't have a good way out of, to be honest with you. If we're going to start with something, I might start with something on a lower percentage end and see how it works in the field, so to speak. And we can always modify it, but I just don't know where you hang your hat on these percentages, because the cases will vary so much from one site to another. So that's what I struggle with on this whole.
Yeah, I too am not excited about the hotel nor the apartment. And I think we can do the density bonus or the low income parking reduction that way on the residential. And I don't think there's enough transit locally to really argue that a 1-for-1 on a hotel room is something that we want to not enforce. I think reduction is just going to be difficult, especially when meeting rooms are added. And then I would curious, has anybody done a parking demand study locally for projects, and what has that, if they have, what has that told us is a reasonable reduction?
The only project that comes to mind was the Riverwalk Terrace, which is the 79-unit affordable senior housing. They could have gone through a density bonus because it was 100% affordable project. They did not, but they did provide a parking reduction study with the premise that most residents living there many of them don't even have vehicles. So that one comes to mind, but it doesn't really fit into if we're saying that, residential we would punt to the density bonus standards. That doesn't really help, but that's the one that comes to my mind. And they, I don't know that there's a standard format for these parking reduction studies, and so maybe we would need to be more specific on what findings the Planning Commission would need to make.
So I guess these numbers, I think if we're looking at it, if the parking demand study says we can reduce it by 20%, then maybe that's what we do. But I'm not seeing the likelihood of a larger reduction than 20% personally. Though again, I'm not sure the numbers just jumping out at me, but I wouldn't want to do anything at this as a suggestion tonight. For me, anything over 20% at this time. Even with a parking demand study. I don't know if that was helpful, Commissioner.
I don't even know how to process this. I just know in my 7 years on Planning Commission, when some of these projects come forward, we're always looking, is there enough parking? Is there enough parking? Can we find it? Not too quick to jump to reduce parking without having some rationale for reducing it for a certain percentage. So I don't know what to do with these numbers.
So if I could speak for the commission, maybe we suggest that we at this time wouldn't want to go beyond 20% and then rely upon a parking demand study to tell us what that percentage is, something less than 20.
For me,
Christensen?
thank you. For me, I come back to the broad generalization of it. And if we were just talking about specifics, for example, I would have no problem with 20% on a mini storage. I might even consider 20% on the retail building, depending on the intensity of use, right? But hotel room, I don't know that I feel comfortable leaving that door open because of what we've seen proposed. And like you know, Chairperson Neal mentioned, which was a good point, when these projects come in and they're even mixed in nature, or just a hotel, for example, that has mixed use in itself, conference rooms, you know, facilities, you know, those types of things that we've seen. They're using basic minimums for staff parking, stuff like that, which we know inherently may not be, in the end run, I don't want to say true, but you know, the intensity is going to be probably more than that. The demand for parking will be more than that. So I would need to be, for me, I would need to be a little more specific to the particular type of area. And in my mind, it may also come down to, I don't mind having the flexibility to do it, but where is that project located? And that would have a major factor for me in deciding on that, in my opinion. But I would agree overall, 20%. And I don't know that I would agree with that for the hotel portion, and definitely not for the 2-bedroom apartment. So that's where I stand on it.
Yeah, and to be clear, I was hoping to cleave off the hotel portion and the residential portion. Let us continue with what we're doing for the residential and just a 1-for-1 on the hotel rooms, because again, we don't have the transit necessary serving, I think, Paso Robles to be able to reduce that demand.
I would agree with that. I'd be fine with that.
Anything else? Well, I think, go ahead, Darcy.
So I'm trying to be proactive on the hotel real for a moment, because I know we're going to be getting to it when we get an admin draft. So right now it's one space per room and then 1 space per employee on the largest shift. A lot of times we're getting, you know, 100 unit or 100 room hotel, and they're saying they have 3 people on the maximum shift. And we just know that's not true. So with the Planning Commission, you know, do you think staff should maybe look at maybe a ratio of, you know, and 1 per, you know, kind of based, like I know for auto repair, we have, you know, based on the number of bays, right? So wondering if we should revisit that. And again, this isn't in this section, this is going to be coming, but it is something that comes up a lot. And it does seem like hotels tend to be underparked to the point that Planning Commission is, you know, making that reductions don't seem like a good idea.
Yeah, and I think a good hotelier would make the argument that a good portion of their housekeeping staff is there when the guests are not. At least that's what I would make the argument, whether that's the case or not. But I agree that, yeah, 3 people at a 100-room hotel is not the number. And I don't know if there's any way to see employment for local hotels to try to figure out that number, or do a study. I'm sure there are folks that understand hotel staffing size.
So Genevieve, is that everything? Because there was actually one more thing I wanted to go back to, but I'm not sure if that's it. Yep. Is that it?
That's everything. Yeah.
Okay. Can we jump back to ODS, like the slide about transparencies, the question for discussion about articulation facing the public right of way? One last thing I wanted to get clarification, because I think this is actually pretty substantial. So some of the feedback that we got when Katie and I were working with Vince, and we kind of thought about it as we went through these articulation sections, we really were only focused on what you could see from the right of way. And to Vince's point, from a cost perspective, he was less concerned about what you would have in the rear yard or, you know, facing the neighbor's interior property line. And so the way that we've put the ODS chapter together is we are only concerned about what you can see from the right of way. Does the Planning Commission agree with that, or would you really like us to emphasize other elevations? And we do have a carve out for corner treatments on corner intersections, so that will be covered. But you know, if it's a interior lot, do we care about what's on the back or on the interior property lines? And then knowing that we usually get multiple buildings, you know, do we care what the residents see in between, you know, when they're living on one unit and they're interior to the site? Do we worry about those things from from an articulation standpoint?
Commissioner Koch.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought this back, Darcy, because this was a bit of a thought when this slide flashed forward. It seems we've had discussions on some of the projects we approved specifically about balcony materials. And those balconies that front on public rights of way versus those that are seen by everybody else internal to the project. And I think, if my memory is correct, we wanted that to be of the same material, the same opacity. And we've gotten into discussions about, is it good to hide the stuff or show the stuff or whatever, but I think underlying that has been, at least in my thinking, consistency all the way around the building. And so I'm not willing to, I think, forego that. I really would hate to see, we got 4 facades, each one has a different treatment of deck railings, for example, because we don't regulate that. It seems like there should be some consistency in some of those kinds of design elements.
If they were, let's say, rafter tails or corbels that were visible from the right-of-way or trim around a window, do we care that those elements might not be on an interior elevation or, facing interior to the site, and they're getting credit only for what you can see from the right-of-way?
If I recall, during the Chandler approval, we were pretty specific that we wanted four-sided architecture. And I have worked for enough builders in my career to know that builders only put something on the front, and then there are 3 flat planes that are, and folks live behind other folks, and having this 2-story flat plane with windows flush to the facade is horrible. I mean, it's just plain not good. So I think I would like to see more treatment to the other 3 facades of a building, and not just to the front.
I had that same reaction. I'm glad you brought that back. I understand from the building standpoint that that would be cheaper, but I think from a sense of community, seeing it from other vantage points is important.
Commissioner Kogler.
I think the word that Commissioner Kogler used was dead on, and that's the word consistency. I think as a commission, as long as I've been on it, which is not as long as some of the others, one of the things that we try to do is be consistent. And so I think that needs to be true in the architecture and the buildings that occupy our city. And I think we've tried to do that time and time again. So to change that, I think it would be detrimental, because if not enough effort is made on the entire building, what's the sustainability, longevity of the other parts of the building? Are they going to deteriorate faster because there's not enough emphasis put on those? So that's just my comment.
Commissioner Copeland.
Yeah, I guess I may drive by one of these buildings once every month, for all I know. I don't know. The people come home to these every single day at night, and I don't know why we would think that there's some standards necessary to create an attractive environment for them as well, and I think the consistency does that.
Commissioner Christensen.
I'm just piling on. Thanks for bringing it back. Yeah, I would agree with this. We've had many discussions, especially on some multi-family projects that butt up against residential, and I know that we've gone back and forth with particular builder developers, and we've had to establish some clarity in that, and I feel that we did a good job with that. So I think consistency in some fashion or form would really help. In some cases, I could understand that maybe they don't need the equivalence of what's on the front, but definitely, some detail so that it doesn't just look so plain and broad and empty. Anyway.
Anybody else? Great. Well, thank you, Darcy. Thank you for bringing that back. All right. Does that wrap this one up?
Yep, I think that's it. Genevieve, thank you.
And I think we're pretty thorough on our direction. Or were we?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we got a lot of really good insight tonight. Thank you so much for your time and input.
Commissioner Conley.
Yeah, could I just add a suggestion on the process? I mean, reviewing this package beforehand, it talks about attachments and the changes. But in doing the changes that I've done for my work, I would compare a Word document from the existing to a Word document for the proposed, and it would have lines or underlines or show changes. And when I look at the attachments and try to find these changes, I can't find them because there's the existing and there is a proposed, but they're intermixed. So I don't know if that could be a suggestion in the process. So we can, when we review the package, we see the changes in the attachments.
Right. So I think most of what we're doing, because it's a complete overhaul and we're moving things that almost everything is struck out at this point. There might be Articles 5 and 7, which were, the two larger ones we saw tonight. Since there are very few changes, that might be easy to do, but even still, we've reorganized things, so it ends up being where everything is a strike through. I know that what we're trying to do with the format of the staff report is to kind of pull out what those key changes are, and certainly we, if we can figure out a better way to do it, we will. But I think that the strike through process is just at this point, everything would be stricken out in the packet.
Thank
Genevieve,
you.
Is there anything, is that hit it pretty spot on?
Yes, unfortunately. We've tried in the past in different jurisdictions to try and do it, and it's an exercise in futility, unfortunately. We have a lot of stuff that we're moving around, so it doesn't lend itself to track changes very well at all, unfortunately.
Commissioner Kogler?
Thank you. Yeah, clearly this is enough of a major overhaul that track changes isn't going to work. But I'm wondering, Genevieve, in your slides, you did a really nice job pulling out those things that you needed to discuss and focus on. And if we could integrate a little bit more of that into the staff report, I think it would be helpful. It might bridge between track changes and just wandering, looking for things. So I think if you can do call outs that really emphasize those points that have changed significantly, things you want to input on, like you've done very well on the slides, that would help in the staff report.
Is that it from everybody? Is that it from staff? Great. So I guess we'll move on to the consent calendar. We have the September 26th, 2023 Planning Commission minutes. Any comments or changes on that? If not, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Christensen
Covarrubias.
and Covarrubias, seconded.
Okay.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Christensen,
Aye.
Commissioner Covarrubias.
Aye.
Commissioner Kogler,
Aye.
Commissioner Connolly,
Aye.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Chairperson Neal.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Great. Other reports, Paso Robles Streetscape Ad Hoc Committee report, I suspect nothing.
We don't have anything specific on that, although just kind of as an aside, I guess, as an update, we do know one of the major issues on Paso Robles Street is street lighting, and we are looking at kind of a comprehensive approach to street lighting within the downtown, potentially even over to Paso Robles Street. So the city has hired a lighting specialist to review downtown lighting, both the quantity of light, dark spots, as well as decorative light standards to be used throughout the downtown, including potentially Paso Robles Street. So there is some action on downtown and kind of just citywide lighting that's in process. I do think that's going to yield some results that will be beneficial to some of our ideas for both Railroad Street and Paso Robles Street. So as that consultant gets further into their work, we'll try to plug in a planning commission, at least a briefing on that, just so you can kind of find out what's going on with that.
Great, thank you. HCOC update.
Right. So we have been meeting with HCOC. Last meeting we went over the development impact fee changes. We were going to talk about the items that the Planning Commission saw tonight as part of the study session, but we did not have time. So HCOC is continuing to meet. And then zoning code, which we went over tonight. So I think we're probably going to maybe have time for one more study session to review the remainder sections. I'm not sure when that will be, but then we're looking at this whole thing being done spring, March, March-ish of next year. So we're going to put our heads down and work hard.
Great, and as a suggestion for the next HCOC, do not bring a fee item, because it seems to suck all available time. So if we want to go
noticed.
over the zoning, we should just have zoning. So. Good. And then the development review committee rotation schedule, I think December is the same as November. And is there anybody that has difficulty with any of the dates in December? Seeing none. I think that's it for the rotation. Planning Commissioner comments. We'll start with Commissioner Conley. Any comments this evening?
No, very good job for everybody. Thank you.
Commissioner Davis?
No, good job.
Commissioner Covarrubias?
Nope, I'm good.
Commissioner Kobler?
No comment, just a question of staff. The short-term rental staff reports available on or about December 1. In terms of policies, fees, and all, are there some suggested changes that are going to be coming forward as a part of that?
So the council's asked to agendize the implementation resolution that's a companion to the ordinance. So that's going to be on the next council agenda. That's December 5th, next Tuesday. That report will be out on Friday. Right now, the draft report includes additional policies and procedures for dealing with the wait list, as well as penalties for violating the short-term rental ordinance. Council also asked for options to reduce the wait list. So there's a discussion about options to deal with the wait list as well.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you reduce the wait list by increasing the number of permits allowed?
That's one option.
Thank you.
Is another option reviewing the transferability in other zones?
I believe that will be listed as an option as well in the final report.
Thank you. Friday. I did have one question, sorry, and I meant to ask this earlier. The EIR for the landing, I've still got that. Are we still reviewing that particular binder? Or do I need to drop it back off here for somebody as a boat wait, or?
So we actually had a meeting with the applicant for the project today. They are going to make some changes to the project that will then make some changes to the EIR, which will likely cause at least a partial recirculation. So we're going to spend probably the next month or two sorting out the scope of those changes and then what the EIR process is. So I would stop reading that EIR if you've been trying to get through it. Know that there's probably going to be an updated version of it with a slightly modified project come spring of next year.
Thank you.
And I have no comments. Staff comments?
Yeah, you did make a recommendation on that Covelop industrial project, went to council, got continued because there was a CEQA challenge raised. That's going to be on the next council agenda. We don't have any resolution to that CEQA issue, so it's going to get continued indefinitely. So the CEQA challenge issue to these commercial industrial projects is definitely going to start to affect how these projects are being processed. We continue to get inquiries from attorneys on all these projects that have pending CEQA documents on it. So you'll start to see probably a little bit different approach to how some of the CEQA documents are prepared in the near future. So just be aware of that. In terms of projects in process, the Olson specific plan is really getting close to starting construction of houses. So the planning area 13 final map went to the recorder today. That's the STG courtyard project. They have house plans basically ready to pick up very soon. So I would expect you're going to see a lot of work, including construction of residential units early next year. Planning Area 15, Shea Homes owns that, plus a number of other planning areas. They're moving forward with getting their final map recorded probably early December. We expect that they'll start on model homes early next year as well. So you will start to see production housing under construction early next year as they finish up all the backbone road track improvements to go along with that. And I think that wraps up, schedule-wise. So as we come into the new year, we do the annual reorganization and reappointment to the Planning Commission. So we're going to start advertising for Planning Commission recruitment starting 1st of January. So Commissioner Neal and Covarrubias, you'll be eligible to reapply. The interviews with City Council will be February 8th. And then the terms for the new Planning Commission start on March 1st. We're planning to have the Planning Commission reorganization dinner on Sunday, March 3rd. And the Planning Commission Academy will be in Long Beach at the Hilton starting April 6th, I think. So if you're interested in that, coordinate with Marcy so we can get you reservations for that. And I think that's staff's report tonight.
I had one last question. Warren, is there any update on that building there where the Moose Lodge used to be? I know we were supposed to be seeing something coming around this time of year. I don't know if you guys can follow up on that, see where that's at. I just would love to know where that's at in its process. I know they're waiting on something from PG&E, but it's. I mean, the weeds are super tall and still looks pretty defunct.
Yeah, the construction stopped again on that project. That's been kind of an ongoing code enforcement issue. So both the building department and fire department are regularly reviewing it just to make sure it's secure. We're trying to facilitate a process with the property owner to get that project restarted. That has not been fruitful to date, but it is one of those that both staff is actively checking out on a regular basis, and we are concerned about how it's going to do this winter.
Their subdivision map and entitlements are set to expire. I believe it's in January, so you will see it. They will need to apply for a time extension early next year.
And then just a follow-up, is the Shea Homes development age restricted?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And is there, yes, Commissioner Kogler.
The press has reported some 400 odd units associated with that. I don't know if that's the right number. Is that all of their ownerships, or is that just the first of their ownerships?
I think that's a portion of their ownership, and I think that's the portion that they intend to develop as senior product. They actually have additional planning areas and units that aren't included in the 400. And it's our understanding that they're probably going to resell those to another merchant builder, and those will be more production family housing.
Okay, thank you.
A question on that, is the Shea Homes the one that lets up to Quail Run?
No. So Quail Run is, Shea Homes basically, at least the senior portion of the product will be everything that is south of Turtle Creek. So kind of the Olson Ranch House used to be up on the hill, that was south. So from there all the way down to Meadowlark, that's mainly going to be the Shea senior product. And then everything north of Turtle Creek all the way back up to Quail Run, the R-Town area, that's all going to be regular family housing.
Okay.
Great. And then that's everything. Do I have a motion to adjourn? And there's a second, and we'll just go ahead and call that an evening. Thanks, everybody.